Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the award-winning podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading the charge. This episode is part of our ongoing partnership with the Captain's Table Challenge, a global pitch competition championing forward-thinking solutions across maritime sustainability, digitalization, and industry impact. For the second year in a row, The Last Dinosaur is the official podcast of the challenge, and we're excited to highlight the people shaping the future of shipping. And today's guest is definitely one of them. Today, we are talking to Dr. Akanksha Batura Pai, Executive Director at Sinoda Shipping Agency and the number one top woman in shipping on the top 100 list. She wears many hats: IMO Goodwill Maritime Ambassador, Maritime CEO Leader of the Year, global advocate for women in maritime, and a relentless driver of innovation and inclusion. We're going to talk about her leadership journey, how digitalization is transforming the world of ship agency, and how social media and intentional outreach can help attract new and more diverse talent into our industry. Dr. Batura Pai, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And I am excited that I am sitting on an award-winning podcast. I think that is the most exciting thing that's happening to me this December.
I'm flattered that you're on. We actually met briefly in your shipping in 2025 and chatted a little bit, and then this opportunity came up to have you part of the Captain's Table Challenge, and I am equally excited because you are definitely a bright, shining light in our industry. So talk a little bit about how you got into the industry, a little bit about your background and what you're doing today, I guess really with the agency, but overall on your other endeavors.
Thank you. So it's really nice for you to say it's a bright, shining light. But, I'm just trying to do my best. And thanks for that. But I think I definitely have seawater in my veins. I say that everywhere I go because I am the daughter of a seafarer. So I think I have made it pretty obvious on LinkedIn and any place I interact with that, I do work with my family. And the business I work in was started by my father in 1992. And so my brother and I like to say that we grew up with the business, but it was never our, our final destiny to become part of the maritime industry. In fact, my internships were in DBS Vickers in New York, which was a, investment bank. And then I did quite a lot of work for L'Oreal in Milan. And I I certainly thought I would be going into like the FMCG industry. I didn't study anything to do with maritime. I now sometimes wish I did, but I've covered that up by doing other programs and such. So I think growing up surrounded by maritime, it gave me exposure, but not really that many shortcuts that people would think you would get. In fact, it puts a lot more pressure, I feel. So, I have a lot more context, fair enough. And I understand, I think, because I grew up with the business and with my father, who is an ethical sort of leader, that shipping is built on accountability, reputation, long-term thinking. You're not penny wise, pound foolish. That's at least what we've been taught. And you have to do things with lots of ethics. There are many times you can make a buck out of a tough situation for a principal, but we have never done that and we don't do this. And so it is just what I'm ingrained with. And I think that is what I bring to the industry. And that is why I joined it, because I felt that there was a space for someone who also thinks like me, which is, I'm also very much like my dad that way. So this is how I joined, even though the industry does seem at many times that it's dark, dangerous, and dirty. But, I think there are very many snippets of light, and I think it's becoming more and more clean and more transparent, and overall more dynamic and fun as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that certainly you hit upon a lot of really interesting things. It's certainly one of the tougher things because where people have the route of coming in through the family, that sometimes people think you come through the family. I didn't. I kind of stumbled upon maritime. I went to a high school college fair. I'm like, oh, SUNY Maritime. Look at that. It's close to where
Yeah.
my dad grew up. We went there. I literally went on campus. They showed like the ship. It's like 100% job placement, travel the world. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I want to go. And that was
Yeah.
kind of the beginning of the end. And so what I really love to hear a little bit about is some of those challenges of kind of being born into the industry because there are those that are the outsiders like me, and there's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, it's so easy. All you have to do is," but then, like, you talk a little bit about the reality of like, well, yeah, I'm exposed to it, but it's not as easy as you think. I'd love to hear a little bit about that because I think that's kind of an interesting insider's view that could be made a little bit tougher being a woman also in this industry, which is we'll get to
Yes.
that in a little while. That in and of itself still not easy, unfortunately. Women like yourself and others are making it easier. But I'd love to hear your thinking on that and some of the challenges and maybe some of the bright spots that you've had to encounter as you've gone along this journey with the family business.
Yeah. So I think some of this stems from the fact that because we work in, if you don't mind, let me just at least introduce, because Sinoda Shipping Agency is a port agency services provider. I think it's quite normal to know that. And then we have a logistics company as well, and we do some crew transport as well. So we're squarely in the services space of business. And so what happens with services is that it's really just a margin business and it is highly commoditized. So, and most of the time, because Singapore is such a heavy port for all sorts of port calls, generally the rates are very competitive. And so this isn't, how to say, quite the family business that will keep growing because it's very asset driven. It is services driven, and generally as years go by, services become more and more competitive priced. And then we've also got the unique challenge that Singapore's labor is pretty, there's a capacity issue, there's a pipeline issue with the labor, and it's also very expensive. And much of these jobs that are done in our industry are what we call, what I at least I've read, they're called gold collar, which is blue and white mixed. So getting those, having that kind of pay structure and being able to be reputable and not cut corners, it's not the easiest, and it's not a very inviting business for a second or a third generation. I'll be very honest. This is not a ship owning business, right? A ship owning business is asset play as well. So this is what I mean. So you have to really be very invested in the running of the business, and you have to find more efficient ways to run it. And for that to happen, you really have to go through a lot of hard knocks. Because if, let's say, you're digitizing the business as well, you have to first understand the operational flow. You have to be in tandem, you have to work in tandem with all the vendors. And then you have to also do change management for your workforce. Many of them don't want to change how they work. So I think if people would say it's easy, it's not. Sometimes I really wonder, why didn't I just take a 9 to 5 somewhere else? You know? And it is what it is. This is the reality of the situation. Frankly speaking, I volunteer so much of my time because I want to find more meaning in what I do. So I feel I find a lot more meaning when I volunteer my time. I do things for the industry because that's what I enjoy, and in a way that helps me understand my work better. If that makes any sense. So I've understood a lot about my work by going outside in, actually. Again, very counterintuitive, but it worked for me.
So I kind of pride myself on learning something new every day. And I think we got to be always willing to learn and adapt, whether it's learning how to do a podcast or something else. But I've learned something
Yeah.
very interesting because I've really never thought about it from your view of being second or third or fourth generation on a ship owning or something else is very different than being a second
Yes.
generation of a service industry, especially when
Yes.
there's no or little assets. Now, again, maybe a warehouse or something else, but
Yeah.
you're
It's
not you're
different.
not building out things, and I
Yeah.
look at my past life as a shipbroker. Shipbrokers had info, right? As opposed to the owners that have the ships and the cargo and the charters that have the cargo. And it's a very interesting view to look at that to see how shipbroking firms are passed from generation to generation, maybe
Mm.
not within family, but within management structures. It's a similar thing. You need to keep because it's a service industry. And not only does it become more competitive, but the landscape changes. What
Yes.
worked for when your dad started the company in his first 20 years may not work. And I'm not talking about the way you treat people, but some of the things and some of the business strategy may not work because the landscape has shifted or, the people that were prominent 20 years ago are marginalized and the people that were marginalized 20 years ago are more prominent. And I look at like, let's say oil traders, when I first started broking, even before that, yes, the VTOLs and traffickers were big, but there was that
Yeah.
If you look at that chart, the traders really dominate a lot of certain trade lanes, and the oil companies or the bigger ones are maybe covered in different ways. So it's a real interesting thought. I'm
Yes.
really glad that you shared that with us because that's
Yeah.
something I never thought about.
It's really honest, actually. I'm just because I think more people don't realize this, and I think more credit should be given to kids of owners who come into businesses that are not really pure asset plays. Actually,
It's something that I never really thought about that way, and you've articulated it really well. You've also hit on two parts of this podcast that we thematically go over. One,
mm,
obviously, is digitalization, but really, this podcast is a change management podcast masked in
yeah,
maritime digitalization. Talk a little bit more
yeah,
about that because, especially as you implement things, let's say, to employees that have been working in for the company for a while, I'm sure you get resistance there.
yeah,
Talk a little bit about how you work to implement digital tools or other
yeah.
kind of forward-looking tools that can help, do the job and also be more competitive, and more competitive means increasing margins, really be more competitive in a changing landscape.
Yeah. So perhaps I can approach this from two perspectives. One is designing the actual system or the transformation that you're going through. And second is the adoption of it, right? And so when it comes to designing a lot of the changes, again, I think because COVID also happened, it actually was a catalyst for a lot of digital transformation because I think a lot of companies were finding it okay and status quo to do certain things like even write checks or do paper based billing and all of these things. But because of COVID, you had no choice because of the lack of human interaction that you needed to rely on your softwares and your computers and whatnot. So I think that also catalyzed some of the smaller businesses to take the low hanging fruit, right? And then the part about designing as well is I am fortunate that I work, again, it's a family business. I work with my brother who is a software engineer by training. That's kind of what I mean. If this was a true non-family business, we could never afford him, but he's got a moral obligation to help us out. So he's been developing our proprietary systems along with certain developers and whatnot for years now, and it's taken a long time to get us to a point where this the solution that we have or the interface that we have is truly something that's required by our company, right? And it's truly something that services our work. And we didn't really find that we could get that from off the shelf. So I think that part of designing a workflow for yourself is you have to, if you need to work with someone for your proprietary software, it's totally fine. But you should work with someone who knows your industry or who knows your subsector of the industry. So that's a little bit hard as well. And the second thing with change management is also what we really believe in. This is the ethos in our companies. We do incremental changes. Once you get used to the first change, Chris, that is when we'll introduce the next one. So we don't try to do big bombastic changes all at once because that there's a high potential of failure on that, and then you have to reiterate everything. So the prototyping aspect is quite strong in our change management culture, and I think we also talk about our failures. So we openly discuss failures even when we go to panels and things like this, but we also discuss them internally when we realize this didn't work the last time. And for instance, we have no shame in using things that are openly available like Excel or Google Docs or Google Sheets to link up with certain other APIs of ours. So it's not that everything needs to be overhauled. It needs to be something that is user friendly. If people are used to it, even if it's not the best user experience, but people are used to it, you have to appreciate that that also brings value. So I think it is also keeping it simple, seriously, and speaking with enough people before you go on your journey. And I think the bigger companies have it under control, but it's usually the smaller ones that we see. And if in a place like Singapore, we can see that people are having a hard time or struggling with this. I can only imagine how hard it is in the other port cities, right? So I think whatever I share now is very honest. And again, we are very happy to share failures as well because we've had a few on our plate.
Do you have a good success and a good failure that you could share with us? Has there been something that was a success that you were pleasantly surprised in, and then maybe a failure that on the flip side that you thought this is going to work and you ran into a brick wall and it was like, whoa, wait a
Yeah.
minute, that didn't work. and then you go through and maybe talk a little bit about kind of the troubleshooting or how you overcame that.
Yeah. So I think we've had a couple of failures, but I think I will talk about the one that happened on my watch so that, no one's thrown under the bus. But basically, we were trying to digitize one of our fleet management, like driver management and job management. And we developed this entire process. And I did sit with the operations manager at the time, and we sat with the software developer, and we went through all this. But I think at the end of the day, the drivers just didn't like having an extra device. Can you believe it? They just didn't want to have an extra device to be able to have to do their job management on that and then have their handphone. So they just wanted everything done on one device. We have like 9 devices in the office right now that no one's using. They're like tablets. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with them, but they're there. And every time I see it, I think of like I'm embarrassed. And then now I've hidden them in a cupboard so that I don't need to look at that. But I'm
Donate them.
serious. Like no, yeah, I think we might have already. I'm joking. I'm half joking. But what I mean is there was one in time I would see it every day, and I'd be like, ah. So, but it's so funny because you have to work with what people are comfortable with. So then what we started doing is we started kind of using Excel, and then pushing it out to a proprietary built web based app. So like you can even just open it as a browser. And I hope I'm using the right word for it, but yeah, you don't need an app for it basically. So you can just open it up in your browser. You plug in the job order and then you finish it. And so the drivers were so happy there was no extra device. The drivers were so happy that they don't need to write things because they needed to write like pick up, whatever, drop off, and and it's just because everything's pre-filled, right, in things like this. So but the pre-filling comes from Excel. It actually comes from Google Sheets. So it just makes you realize that you have to really just work with what people are used to working with. And there's really no need to, digitize that much, innovate that much. And nowadays, in fact, people are talking about AI. And I'm like, dude, can you assess your problem first? Let's see if it can just be solved by a very basic thing. And I just feel like, yeah, there's a lack of information and there's a propagation of misinformation as well. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's very, very well put. We told this story before, but I think it's worth mentioning. When I was a product manager for many years with Q88 and then Vesson, and
Yeah.
we had a fantastic client that we were originally selling a product to ship. We kind of retooled it for owners, and it happened. We ended up signing a really big tanker owner, and it was kind of like a fluke that, like, anyway, it was a fluke that we ended up signing him in the sense of like we didn't target that person, but through another conversation, it worked. It was
Yeah.
great. Rolled it out all of his offices. I was up at all sorts of hours, rolling out here, there, and everywhere. And I did it. And they stayed with us for 3 years. And then finally, the guy, my point of contact, said, "Listen, Chris, we built our own thing in house." I said, "Well, look, it's not a failure. We had you for 3 years. It was a pretty big contract considering what it was, and I was very happy. It was one of the things that we couldn't give one group exactly what they wanted because we were still competing with Excel. And they basically had to build their own
Mm,
platform. I would imagine they built something very much that we had already in place and
yeah.
added the one little thing with an Excel sheet as a side and probably spent 350, $400,000, a half $1,000,000 building this thing, but they had
Yeah.
everybody on the platform, which, hey,
Yeah.
I get it. It's a pretty big owner, with a lot of tentacles and pools and stuff like that. So I get it, but man, it was one office that was stuck on
Yeah.
Excel.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I totally get it. And I just realized, Chris, I didn't even talk about the success. Look at me.
Yeah, well, now I wanna
But
know about the success.
well, now that you've told me about your little, Excel issue. No, but I think one of the other things we've also learned is to, Aditya is my brother and he always says this, and we all have now integrated this in our own psyches, that you have to fall in love with the problem, not with the solution, right? And so we've now, so every time we look at the situation as what problem do we need to solve, we are happy to go back to the drawing board and make a certain change. And that's why it helps that we do incremental changes. So I think our biggest success is this model of incremental changes and the fact that we have our own architect for this. in-house, right? Not everyone has the luxury of this, to be honest, because most of the time you hand off a project to someone and they'll give it to you in a couple of phases, maybe three, and then you'll implement phase by phase, sure. But it's not as micro incremental as it, in my opinion, should be to make sure that all aspects are covered. If you don't mind, I'm going to share one more failure. Is that if that's okay? Because I do want people to know this before they go into their journey. We used to have a very high end software for agency management, but surprisingly, what happened was that it was actually built for operations and integrated with accounts. But what used to happen was that the accounts team just needed a couple of pieces of information to close the file. And so they started implementing that. Okay, we would like field A to be filled, field D to be filled, field X to be filled. And so the other fields that were kind of not required, operations just didn't fill it. So we never had great data management because they would just do the job that needs to be done for the next team to take it on. So it's very interesting that you can create whatever you want, but until you have ensured that everyone's, number one, happy to fill out everything else, is doing it and not just doing it for the sake of the next department to close the file. So we had something. It was fantastic, and if we fully used it, we would have years of data that I think then Sinoda could be just a data company. But so far it didn't happen quite as that way. So I just want to share with people that when you create a product, please ensure that if you're doing it cross department, you have to ensure that everyone understands what is required and can they do it, will they do it, and are you monitoring it? Because we also didn't have a champion at that point. We didn't
Right.
understand that as much, and this was before my time, by the way, so this is a
No,
while.
and I think too the other things is, and then we could get into some really deep management stuff where you could
Yeah.
talk about KPIs and OKRs that you can measure around this. Like, hey, yes, we know that you only need these 6 fields filled to go up, but really, what we're going to be measuring is all this other data captured because that's going to then have the knock-on effect of we wanna be able to sell that, right? If we don't have it all
Yeah.
here, we can't sell it if we or whatever
Or we can't make good strategic decisions as management. Like, I can't make good decisions.
you have to be able to measure it at some point because if you don't measure it, then you're never gonna be able to know if you could do it or not. I mean,
You
that's the
exactly.
whole problem. Yeah.
You can't change what you don't measure, by the way. So this is I mean, this goes for your weight, this goes for your
Yeah,
inches,
don't
but
don't talk about don't talk about my weight. Come on. What are we
I'm not
doing
talking
here?
about
I
your
mean,
weight.
making me
I'm just giving the people what they want.
you're giving the people what they want. Well, they don't wanna hear about that. One of the
I
things that
mean,
we talked a little bit about,
yeah.
and it's kind of interesting, you talk about AI a little bit. Any concerns or how do you talk to your folks about AI? And, is there a problem with, let's say, potentially taking jobs and things like that? Because I'm sure people are a little nervous about that, for sure.
I'm sure they are, but I don't. I see. I think AI generally replaces things that are repetitive, that have some guesswork involved, and they have some, manual friction, that kind of work. But it will never really replace accountability or your judgment or a human relationship, the trust factor as well. So, I am not. I'm not saying I'm not concerned because I think AI is, to be very honest with you, AI sits above all of us. Because if something gets changed on a different level, on a global trade level, for instance, and that's using AI, then all of us will be affected. But as
Mhm.
so much as the discussion we are having, I personally think that AI in our industry, for instance, can only be used if the data is clean and the data is absolutely certainly correct and all data points are there, because until then AI is not making the most efficient or the ultimately beneficial call for everyone, right? And I think that we have a long way to go until we are able to actually openly have good data and share our data. So I think AI has to be verified as well by the right toolkit, the right frameworks, by white hacking. But at the moment we don't even have the data set,
Mhm.
that AI is supposed to sit on. So I think I won't be able to replace those kind of human relationships. But again, this is at my pay scale. There's stuff happening
Yeah.
that's way above my pay scale, and if that happens, then who knows? You and I may be sipping margaritas on a beach somewhere.
Pivoting away from margaritas and AI, the other interesting part here and the other really the exciting part for me to have you on is to talk about kind of your social media presence. I think it's wonderful. I think between all these accolades, which you have another one, which I didn't even announce today, which talk about that as well, because you got that here. We're recording middle of December, which was announced recently. Um, the Women Together one. Talk a little bit about how we can use social media to get more, get a bigger workforce in terms of a more diverse workforce, more women, more people,
Yeah.
but just diverse from
Yeah.
where they come from. Because I think, we talk about people employing people in Singapore or Houston or New York or London,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of jobs that you could do sitting in the middle of a country landlocked, but if you just like
Yeah.
maritime because you could do it remotely. Talk a little bit about that with social media and how you're using that to promote the industry, to promote diversity and do all that good stuff.
I appreciate that question. And before I get into it, I just want to say that I come from the generation that essentially saw social media being introduced to the world. And so I've always enjoyed it's like a creative outlet for me to post things. Like I even have my own Instagram and things like that. I posted for a long time. So I just want to really caveat this by saying that it's not required for you to use social media. It's the toolkit you have to do whatever good you want to do or whatever impact you want to make. So it's not necessarily social media. Social media is a very helpful platform, but I just want to make that obvious because I do have a lot of close friends who come to me who will be like, oh, I can't post as much, I don't feel, and I just want to let you know that there's human mental health is far more important than posting. So please always remember that do what gives you joy as well, right? And then you'll find passion through that. So social media is really not the be all end all. It really isn't. It's just that fair enough. For me, I enjoy it. For me, it's like a creative outlet as well. And it helps me combine my many interests. But for me, I've used, and I do think a lot of people use social media as an extension of their company culture, their leadership, their voice. And it's a big channel to be able to inculcate a genuine and sincere voice for yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, social media is your persona online, but when people meet you, you have to fit that. You can't be you can't be a different person as you are online. You can't talk a big game and not do anything in person, or vice versa.
Yeah, that's a talk a big game. Yeah, I try not to talk a big game online. At least I don't
This
like to
was not
write.
directed at you, Chris. Chris,
No,
you're
no,
doing
no.
great.
I think yeah, I think about all. No, not no, no, not at all. I was thinking about all the people that say terrible things about other people online. I'm thinking from a very negative point of view.
Mm.
I'm sure you get this too. I get this once in a while with the podcast is people come to me and be like, "You're the dinosaur guy." And then other people who don't know are like, "What are you talking about?" Like, no, never mind. They're
Wow.
like, "Yeah,
See, now,
you
now I think
yeah,
this is a good time for the shout out for what I wore
yes."
for in ode to you and your lovely podcast.
If you're listening to this, you're wearing very bright, very green dinosaur earrings,
Yeah,
which are
earrings, and
fabulous.
they're pretty large. So
They're
my kids are in
not
love with
small.
this. Yeah, they're not small. Chris, I tell you what, if you win the next award as well, let's auction this off, and we can give the money. We can give the mission to seafarers. How about that?
I love it. I love it. I'll have to now. I have to apply. I have to apply next year in
Yeah.
2026 for the same award. But continue.
Well,
I think
so
that's kind of interesting for sure.
yeah, I think we just have to keep it very like in context as well, right? And so shipping generally has been very traditional and inward looking. So what platforms like LinkedIn or social media essentially help us to do is we humanize the industry, right? We showcase real people working, we showcase role models, we highlight the innovation, we talk honestly about the challenges that face us, and it kind of puts a face to the industry as well. And then of course, from a business perspective, it's a good tool to build your trust and credibility because clients generally want to work with people and companies that, they believe are transparent, they're values driven, they're forward thinking, they're honest, they're not fly by night. Fly by night is the phrase being the one that my dad uses a lot, but yes. And then from a mission perspective, this is my favorite part. It helps me to advocate for what I truly believe in, which is inclusion, mentorship, and a more sustainable human maritime future as well. And I'm very open about this. I'm fairly consistent about it. But I think if you meet me offline as well, if there are opportunities, I will always try to refer them to people that I know are capable and deserving. And I think this is what I mean by social media. So you can use social media, but it has to be backed up with real intent and real work. Just be mindful. And I also think the other interesting thing about social media is this used to happen to brands, but now it happens to people on LinkedIn, which I find it can be a little bit, nerve wracking, but you can be held accountable sometimes. So let's say you've said something or you've done something. There are people in comments who'll come and be like, yeah, but this, it didn't work out when you said this, and it's not that common, but I think having that platform like an open suggestion box or like an open feedback form, it gives it there's more accountability to your actions as well, right? You can't really say things you don't do. So
Absolutely.
I think that's a big
Yeah.
thing. That's a big
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. You just got right. Somebody's always listening. Somebody's always watching. Somebody's
Yeah.
always going to challenge you.
Yeah.
That's why, in this podcast, I just try to keep it very, very informative and not
Yeah.
weigh in with really heavy opinions. I have an
Yeah.
opinion, of course, but and we talk about them sometimes, but I wouldn't say they were heavy or something very controversial. And somebody asked me, well, why don't you do like a Joe Rogan a podcast with 3 hours of controversy? I said, I guess we could talk about conspiracies in shipping and maybe I said, hey, look, if you want to pay me $20 million a year, I'll talk whatever the hell you want. I'll just do it for 1 year and I'll be done. But then again,
Yeah.
it may not be an authentic conversation. And I think
But
that
I'll join in on that if you get a 20
yeah, man,
million
you're
check.
in. Don't worry about it. I'd love to have you. But one of the things that I do find, and I do find that our little corner of LinkedIn, ours meaning the maritime shipping space,
Yeah.
what I think is we could use it for good and a lot of good. And one of the things that I think we can use it for, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is attracting and retaining talent,
Mm.
especially the next generation, right? There was a time, I won't say who, but I ran into somebody in Dubai and we were having a chat and we looked at each other and we go, yeah, at one point we were like the young ones, when we started off together, and this person and I, who's extremely senior, like talk about above the pay grade, and we were having a chat, very nice chat. It was kind of in the afternoon, just in between running around, and it occurred to me, it's like, yeah, no, we're not. Like we're not.
Yeah.
I don't feel old. I'm of the generation where when I was 15, it felt like I was 30. When I was 30, I felt like I was 30. Now that I'm in my 50s, I still feel like I'm
Yeah.
30. I'm clearly not, but that's my generation. I'm Gen X. And
Yeah.
this person was agreeing with me on that. How do we use social media to really highlight,
Yeah.
hey, we may have our problems, there may be issues, but the water's fine. Come in to this industry. There's a great place here. You don't have to be part of the family. You don't have to go to a maritime school. I'm pointing the finger
Yeah.
at
Yeah. Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
We got lots of places for you and a lot of really different, really cool career paths.
And I think you're absolutely right. The main thing that's happening with shipping and with many other industries is that the contemporary problems that we're facing have to be solved by multidisciplinary thinking. And in order to present that level of solutioning, we have to attract people from different uh, backgrounds, educational and experiential. And so for that, LinkedIn helps because to solve a maritime problem, you have to have maritime knowledge as well, to meaningfully solve something. So, like you're talking about decarbonization, you're talking about strengthening our talent pool or digitally transforming companies and having data points and all of that. But then on the other hand, I think even with our companies, what we are trying to do is that we're not just reskilling or digitally transforming, we're actually redesigning our jobs as well. Because we understand that this isn't really going to work. Like, we're not going to be able to get people to do the same old things that they used to do before in this day and age. So, for instance, like we have one of the core things of a port agency is boarding officers. Like, they have to go on board and do various things for the master on behalf of the principal. Uh, but we've noticed actually during COVID, we had to stop doing that because there was a way that there was a bubble, right? And then that was also a problem for seafarers. That's another podcast for that. Then the workforce got used to the fact that, oh, we don't always have to go on board. And so now we are also actively, as management, trying to solve or make a better solution for this where we can reliably not send humans on board and do something else instead. Right? And I don't think the solution is going to come out very fast, but I think that we have to also actively look at not just reskilling and retraining and attracting people, but it's also retaining And you can only retain if you do job redesigning, right? And I think me becoming a mom in the last few years, like I became a mom right after COVID around there. And so I realized it's so hard. With my first kid, I didn't even want to go back to, I didn't step into the office, I think, for like 2 years. Like I did whatever I could do from home. But what I'm trying to say is it's a relentless industry that is quite tough to survive, especially for the traditionally disenfranchised. And so if you don't make it a priority to make certain changes and use digital tools to allow people to stay in your company, it gets hard. As a company, we've always been very forward thinking, where we, like, there are companies that won't hire women because they'll be like, they're just going to get pregnant and they're going to leave and they're going to not come back or whatnot. But we've always invested in the human workforce, right? In the human aspect of things. And most of our staff has stayed with us for maybe more than 10 years, 15 years. So this is just the next step. This comes to us as like, okay, we have to do this for the people as well. It's not just a marketing play. It's something we're just trying to do. Job redesign sounds big, but it's just that we're trying to figure out, like, how do we allow for people to step away to do their caregiving duties and then come back and have it all still set up. So this is still a work in progress, but as in, by and large, we have to do these things in the background. And then, of course, you have to talk about this on social media and LinkedIn and whatnot. But, that's a long process. It's a
And
long process.
And I think your approach, from what I can understand and what I see from just our brief conversation with the incremental side, is
Yeah.
you try and maybe have a failure and you try again and the constant change, not change for change sake, but change for betterment is certainly the way that you move the industry. This industry goes back. I love the book about Marco Polo, and they were using charter parties. I mean, that's how long charter parties have been around.
Yeah.
That's how old
Yeah.
the industry is. If you probably look at a charter party, if you can get one in English from Marco Polo, it probably has all the same parts that it has today, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously there are some things that are different, but in essence, it's a contract and it's still the same. So, trying to change that industry that's been around for hundreds or thousands of years. It's an admirable undertaking, but one that the success of the industry as a whole needs to be aware of. As we wrap up, I love to talk about this question. We talked a little bit about before we got going. What are you reading? I know you do a lot of travel. I saw you in Norway. I see you here, there, and everywhere. You have family at home. You have the family of the business. You have all these accolades and awards.
Yeah.
You got
Well,
probably building bookshelves behind you to like house all your awards. I got the one
no,
award
no,
for
no.
my small space. I had to just get rid of
Come
Bob
on.
Ross there, but because I had a Bob Ross bobblehead doll, I had to move him over. But all kidding aside, are you reading anything interesting? It could be a book, it
Yeah.
could be articles, it could be. And
Yeah. Yeah.
here's the
Yeah.
other one. Here's the other one. It's okay to say this. I know you just got your PhD. Are you writing anything? Because it
No,
sounds
no.
like some of what you're working on could be made
Yeah.
into a management book. I'm just saying.
I should have, right? No, actually, first of all, it wasn't a PhD. It's like basically, it's a prestigious award. So it's a professional doctorate. But because I want to be very honest, because it's my dream to actually do a PhD, like a research based PhD.
Okay.
So maybe at some point. But I did finish before I kid you not. So when I had kids, I started doing audiobooks. We discussed this earlier before we started filming. But and because I was like, oh my God, I'm holding this child for hours. Like I'm just like bouncing this kid on this yoga ball. And so I was like, what do I listen to? So my options were like true crime and murder mysteries. And I'm holding my child and I'm like, no, that sounds a bit scary, but it's not going to help my postpartum mind. So I started listening to lots of like audiobooks. So I rotate between like leadership, psychology, anthropology, health, personal development, behavioral economics. Like, so this is my jam. But the what I was trying to I was trying to tell you something now. I completely lost my train of thought. But
That's okay.
yes, I was thinking why I was looking at my book list and I was like, how come I stopped reading that much this year? And then I remembered that I just finished this WMU postgrad diploma. So everything I was doing was lectures and it was yeah, I kid you not. This is the mind of a mom. Like you really have like I goldfish mind. So I was like, why? Why do I have such few books? And now I just remembered is because I was stuck listening to lectures throughout. But yeah, I think some of the good books I've read, if you don't mind, I'll just share three. One is The Good Enough Job, which is basically, your job should support your life and not consume it. And I think it's a quite interesting read for people especially who are young and also mid career, because keep thinking that this should be my all. This should be my passion. And it should. Passion follows when you do a job good enough. But it's also important to understand it's okay to not have it be your life. It can have other aspects of your life, you know. And in fact, I often quote this: a jack of all trades, but a master of none is much better than the master of one, actually. Like, that's the full quote, if I'm not wrong. And so I always remind people that it's really okay to just enjoy doing a variety of different things, because if you fail at one thing, then there's something else in your life that can pick up. And that happens a lot with people who, for instance, are athletes, and they've stopped running, or they've got bad knees, bad back, and then they kind of lose themselves sometimes. So it's good to have different ambitions. And I think this book also talks a little bit about that. And the second book that I've read in a while back, but it always guides me, is The Psychology of Money. It's a very famous book, but I think it's a timeless book on the lessons of wealth and happiness, because we often conflate the two, and it's important to separate them, look at them separately, and see what you like in your life and pursue that. Do you want to be rich, but you want to be rich in which ways? And I think this book will help you at least draw up a roadmap. And the third is because I'll share this because I think a lot of people have lost loved ones as we get older. And so we recently lost my father-in-law 3.5 months ago. And so I started reading this book called Dying to Be Me. It's about this lady who beats cancer, and it's a very interesting take on life and death. And this, actually, I haven't finished yet. It's a little hard to finish because I know the reason I'm reading it.
Yeah.
But it's I wanted to share this because I think in the last few days I've actually heard a lot of negative news from close friends about losing their parents or even their pets. So sometimes it's important to know, or to have a more faithful way of looking at things. And I don't mean religion, I just mean like what is out there, right?
Yeah.
So these are the three things I could share, and I think it's a holistic way to look at life, I hope.
It's very interesting. The last one, I think about those things. My dad passed away a year and a half ago
I'm sorry.
after about a 3-year struggle with lung cancer. So that certainly is always, I think, like you said, you get to a certain point and people pass away, and it kind of
Yeah.
happens sometimes in bunches, unfortunately.
Yes.
And so you do have to deal with that. Going back to your first book, however,
Yeah.
reminds me of another book that I read called Range, Range, Range. And
Okay, I'm gonna put that on.
it talked about you don't have to be an expert on everything, but actually people who have a
Yes.
range of skill sets are actually better for companies because they're able to solve problems in a lot of different ways rather than I only did this. So that the book Range was kind of reminds me a little bit of the first book that you mentioned. But this was an absolute fantastic pleasure. I learned so much just about running an agency, a family business, how it's different than what I thought. So you've actually cleared up a little bit of a misconception as well as, kind of the forward looking bit that we talked about, because I really think that developing roles that can be a little bit more, I think maybe the way is flexible, portable,
Yeah.
and Akanksha, but
I
that's
think it's
that's
just
what
like, yeah,
I'm
right.
thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, flexible,
Redesigning jobs
portable.
to be more flexible, to be more 21st century, right? To having now.
So this was a great conversation. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I wish you the best in
Thank you.
2026, and I'm sure I'll see you down the road somewhere for sure.
Absolutely. Mostly as a groupie, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Multiple award winner
We
in
hope
just a
so.
year.
We
I'm
hope
sure.
so.
I'm sure. I am very sure of it. You're excellent, Chris. And if you don't mind giving me a minute to say thank you to you, I've really enjoyed myself here. And I wasn't sure if this was going to be a podcast or video cast. I'm just glad I found these right in time.
Well, this will be probably a little bit of both, but yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you
Yeah,
for thank
no,
you
no,
for
I
wearing that.
loved
That
it.
was great.
I absolutely love this, and you deserve the accolade that you've received, and I hope you will get a lot more. And I think what you're doing is very important. Also, you have to spread awareness about the industry. It tends to be siloed. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and I think it's really fun. And thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for coming on.